Welcome to the show. My name is Tuam. This show considers knowledge using a lens of political economy. What is political economy, you ask? Well, the big answer is that it is a branch of study that focuses on relationships between individuals, governments, and public policy. Then, it considers how these policies affect the nation's economy. The more simple definition of political economy considers ideas like the distribution of wealth, ownership of property, and issues of supply and demand. It essentially looks at all matters of development while keeping a keen eye on the politics of the day. For us to understand economic impact, therefore, it is necessary to apply rigorous analysis to information from the right source. Indeed, knowledge is only as powerful as its source. So, with that in mind, welcome to The Source.
Welcome to another episode of The Source. Kevin.
Yes.
Economists Njuguna Ndii and David Ndii have decided to help Ruto do an economic model for hustlers and help it fit into his bottom-up approach. Now, what do you think of this approach by Ruto and the economists? Is it really genuine?
Well, thank you, JM. You see, bottom-up economics is also known as the trickle-up effect or the fountain effect. It's a concept coined by famous monetarist John Maynard Keynes. And the central thesis of this concept is economic progression driven by the middle class through fiscal and monetary interventions. For example, if the government wants to spur up spending by the middle class, they cut taxes, they cut interest rates, and they increase government spending as well. Now, producers are incentivized to produce, banks are incentivized to lend, factories are incentivized to hire, and this is done by targeting a specific social economic class of people. Now, I therefore think that Ruto's model is laughable, and that's because its theoretical grounding is flawed. And that's because Ruto advocates for a bottom-up economic approach that aims at pumping resources at the poorest level of society. And yet, the model he advocates for is really meant to drive aggregate demand within the middle class, And there is a reason it is aimed at the middle class. And that's because the middle class are the engine of the economy, right? They would have the most impact on aggregate demand of all factors of production. They occupy the largest strand of all social economic classes. We have lower middle class and we have upper middle class. We don't have lower people and upper poor people. We simply have poor people. And as a result, middle class dictates how the markets work.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Now, on to our second question. David Ndii in an interview once said that SGR did not make any commercial or economic sense.
Right.
And he says it's too expensive and Uhuru should have just upgraded the old meter gauge railway.
Yeah.
You've written so much about the standard gauge railway, and so perhaps this is a question that you've answered over and over and over again. But tell us, does it make any sense to you?
Thank you very much, John Allen.
Yeah.
That to me almost sounds like a rhetorical question, as you have said. I pronounced myself on this railway right from the outset before it was built. And I suggested that it shouldn't be built. Precisely because even from very preliminary observation at the time, it did not make either commercial or economic sense to me.
Does he make sense?
Of course he doesn't. Show me who amongst Africa's 5 greatest economies is using colonial railways or relics to transport cargo. Let me give you some statistics. Before SGR was built, Jonathan, about 98% of cargo from the port of Mombasa was evacuated by road. Then Mombasa Port, then at that time Mombasa Port was handling about 22 million metric tons every single year. Mind you, the cargo wasn't just Kenya's. It was Uganda's, it was Rwanda's, it was DRC Congo's cargo, and it was also Burundi's cargo. Just imagine 22 million metric tons, all on a single lane road to the green economies of East and Central Africa. And that's just cargo. You know what? You and I want to go to Mombasa. We use the same road. How would that have looked in the year 2021? Yes, it would have been much cheaper, but it would take longer to travel that distance. And God forbid an accident happens on that road. You and I will sleep there. You know, I shudder to think what David Day would have told William Mackinnon or James Hutton and Lord Aberdare in 1888 when the three built what we know now as the Lunatic Express. You know, excuse me, the one from Mombasa to Jinja. You know, if Dee was alive then, he would have told Mackinnon and Co. that it made commercial and economic sense to walk for 90 days from Mombasa to Uganda. And all they needed to do was rehabilitate the walkways through the African bush. I mean, the Arab slave traders had devised a cheaper method to transport their human cargo. You know, just think about it that way. Yes, they would have told them that it took longer, was full of risks, like being eaten by lions, but it was cost effective.
Yeah. But what about upgrading the old meter gauge railway?
You know, JM, it's the same point that I'm making.
Yeah.
You cannot use an old map to go to new lands. It's like having a donkey with a saddle. Total waste of time, you know. Ask yourself, why rehabilitate an old snaky meter gauge railway built in the 18th century to evacuate cargo? Modern railways are straight to make sure the trains travel faster. They're wide enough to take huge amounts of cargo. You know, the bottom line here is, JM, it's efficiency. Why should it take 1 week by road from Mombasa to Malaba, and yet it can take 48 hours? You know, just think about that. Why should it take 96 hours by Mackinnon's 1888 rail, and yet SGR can do that in 48 hours? The math is simple. Yes, it's going to cost, but in the long run, it's one hell of an investment. Right now, JM, 40% of cargo that used to go by road has shifted to SGR.
Yeah.
You know, in fact, by 2018, 1 year after SGR's completion, freight traffic from the port of Mombasa to Nairobi increased by 209%. Then Dee tells us that it's not commercially viable. It's total nonsense.
Lastly, Kevin.
Yes.
Many comparisons have been made between Kenya's SGR, Ethiopia's SGR, and Tanzania's SGR. And pundits out there say Kenya's SGR was inflated. Is that right?
This is a case of comparing apples and oranges. The different countries, three different countries, three different contexts, you know, three different situations. And here as well, let me give you some figures. Ethiopia's SGR costs $4 billion to build. Total length is 700 kilometers. That translates to an average cost of $5.7 million. Land there is actually owned by the state. Therefore, there is no compensation. You know, JM, it is operational right now, but you know what? It only runs 4 times a week. It's actually like taking a flight. You know, Tanzania is building the SGR. They intend to build a 550-kilometer line from Dar es Salaam to a place called Makutopora. You know, the total cost of the project is about $7.6 billion. Now, Tanzania is actually spending $12.7 million per kilometer. And so far, it is not operational. They have only completed 200 kilometers of rail. And that's because they simply did not have the funding. You know. Lastly, Kenya. We have built a 609 kilometer railway of SGR at a total cost of $4.7 billion. That translates to about $7.7 million per kilometer. Yet, Kenya's is fully operational. Yes, we had hordes of people to compensate. Now, Kenya doesn't have a planned economy like our good neighbors. Therefore, we had to compensate their pieces of land at market value. Did some people eat? That's not my business. In any case, who asked Mackinnon if he ate? He built a railway, did not compensate anyone. He then went broke in 2 years, you know, when building the Lunatic Express. And then he sold Kenya for 250,000 sterling pounds to recover his costs. And your worry is if there was corruption in SGR, you know. But bottom line, JM, is we have a railway that works and it's modern. Kenya has first mover advantage over its neighbors. None of them can register or have registered what Kenya can when it comes to SGR. You know, we operate 6 commuter trips a day and over 8 cargo trips a day. It moves over 5 million passengers and moves about millions of, I don't know how many millions of tons of cargo every year, but it does that. And no one is doing it like Kenya right now. Yes, we do have our own problems, like David Day, but in the greater context of things, Uhuru made the right decision to invest on big infrastructure. And by now, if you still think SGR is a waste of time, just think of Kibaki's worst insult. You are that. Thanks for having me, Jay.